They called him Private Mop, the silent black janitor who limped through the elite Navy SEAL training facility each night, invisible despite his imposing frame. Darius Cole never responded to the mockery from cocky recruits like Jake Matthews, whose blue eyes narrowed with contempt whenever their paths crossed. The instructors barely noticed him either, just another maintenance worker with proper clearance. But in the dim light of the locker room, when Darius thought himself alone, he would open a small metal box containing a SEAL Trident, Purple Heart, and dog tags, bearing his name and rank. His calloused fingers would trace photographs of men in combat gear, brothers lost to a mission that official records claimed never happened. When Chief Warner finally recognized the distinctive tattoo on Darius's neck one morning, the whispers began. The quiet janitor wasn't just cleaning their facility. He was a ghost, a legend who had chosen to haunt the halls where warriors were made, carrying secrets that even the most classified files wouldn't reveal. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Virginia Beach stood like a fortress against the darkening sky. Most of the days, activity had died down, leaving only the hum of air conditioning and the occasional clang of weights being re-racked by the few determined stragglers. It was that peculiar time of evening when the ambitious stayed late and the maintenance staff began their silent work. Darius Cole moved through the weight room with practiced efficiency, his mop gliding across the rubber flooring in long, methodical strokes. At 62, his movements carried the deliberate pace of a man conserving energy, not wasting a single motion. His dark skin had deepened with age, lined around the eyes and mouth with marks that spoke of both laughter and grief. The slight limp in his left leg became more pronounced as the night wore on, but he never complained, never stopped. He simply adjusted his rhythm and continued. The facility was a temple to physical perfection. State-of-the-art equipment gleamed under bright lights, walls adorned with the SEAL Trident and motivational phrases that demanded greatness. Inside this shrine to elite warriors, Darius moved like a ghost, present but unseen, essential yet invisible. "Hey, old-timer, missed a spot." The voice cut through Darius's concentration, young and sharp with the kind of confidence that hadn't yet been tested by real failure. Jake Matthews stood by the squat rack, his 6-foot frame still pumped from his workout, sweat glistening on his broad shoulders. At 24, he possessed the kind of natural athleticism that made everything look easy. His blonde hair was regulation short, his blue eyes clear and challenging. He pointed to a small puddle of sweat near the bench press. Darius nodded without making eye contact, redirecting his mop toward the indicated spot. He'd been cleaning this gym for nearly 3 years now, and he knew the routine. Some recruits nodded respectfully. Others, like Jake, needed to establish dominance, even over the cleaning staff. "Appreciate it," Darius said quietly, his deep voice barely carrying across the room. Jake smirked at his 2 training partners, Scott Wilson and Tyler Brooks. "Man speaks," he stage whispered, drawing chuckles. Thought he might be mute. Darius continued mopping, his face betraying nothing. He'd heard worse. Much worse. $5 says he's never even touched a Beretta, Scott added, emboldened by Jake's lead. He was thinner than Jake, but with the wiry strength of a distance runner, dark hair cut high and tight. "Probably thinks it's a pasta dish," Tyler joined in. The shortest of the 3 but built like a tank, his arms were covered in tattoos celebrating his hometown of Nashville. Darius finished with the puddle and moved to the next section of flooring. His silence was a well-worn shield. From across the room, Captain Elena Ramirez watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. At 35, she'd earned her position as head physical training instructor through years of exceptional service and an uncanny ability to identify which recruits had what it took to make it through BUD/S training. Her olive skin was sun-kissed. From countless hours training outdoors, her black hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. "Matthews," she called sharply, "if you've got energy to run your mouth, you've got energy for another set. 20 more burpees before you leave." Jake's smile faltered, but he nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He dropped to the floor and began the exercise, his form perfect despite his fatigue. Ramirez approached Darius as he worked. "Don't mind them," she said quietly. "They're not all like that." "No problem, ma'am," Darius replied, continuing his work without breaking rhythm. Ramirez studied him for a moment. She'd seen countless janitors come through the facility, but something about Darius had always struck her as different. He carried himself with an awareness that most civilians lacked, moved through spaces with a calculated efficiency. And unlike most civilian staff, he never seemed intimidated by the facility or its purpose. "Have a good night, Mr. Cole," she said finally, heading for the exit. "You too, Captain," Darius replied, the military courtesy flowing naturally from his lips. Ramirez paused for just a moment, then continued on her way. Later that night, Darius made his final rounds, checking that all equipment was properly stored and secured. As he bent to retrieve a weight clamp that had been left on the floor, his shirt collar shifted, revealing a small portion of a tattoo on the back of his neck. Jake, finishing his punishment burpees, caught sight of it, the distinctive shape of a SEAL Trident peeking out from beneath the collar. "No way," Jake muttered, staring. "Hey, Wilson, check out the janitor's ink." Scott glanced over. "Probably got it at some strip mall shop. Bet he's never even seen a real one up close." "Probably ordered it off eBay," Jake laughed. "Stolen valor much?" Darius straightened, tugging his collar back in place. If he heard the comments, he gave no indication. He simply continued his work, moving to the next station, with the same careful precision. The following morning, Darius sat alone in his small apartment 5 miles from the base. The sun hadn't yet risen, but he was already awake, going through a ritual that had remained unchanged for decades. He made a single cup of green tea, letting it steep for exactly 3 minutes. While waiting, he sat in perfect stillness on the edge of his bed, eyes closed, breathing controlled. Not meditation exactly, but a focusing of the mind, a calibration of the day ahead. When the tea was ready, he moved to a weathered trunk at the foot of his bed. The lock opened with a practiced turn of the key. Inside lay a folded American flag in a triangle display case, several service medals nestled in a velvet-lined box, and a stack of photographs protected by clear plastic. Darius lifted one photo, a team of men in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, eyes squinting against Middle Eastern sun. Every face smiled except his own, which wore the careful expression of a man responsible for bringing everyone home alive. He touched each face in the photo, his lips moving silently as if reciting names, before carefully returning everything to the trunk and locking it away. At the facility that morning, Captain Ramirez sat at her computer, scrolling through personnel files. When she reached Darius Cole's file, she frowned. Most of it was redacted, thick black lines obscuring almost everything except his name, employee, ID number, and a single line. Contracted maintenance, cleared TS. Top secret clearance for a janitor. She closed the file, making a mental note to ask her commanding officer about it later. On the training floor, Jake was sparring with Scott, practicing hand-to-hand combat techniques. Jake moved with natural athletic grace but occasionally sacrificed proper form for speed. During a particularly aggressive takedown attempt, he twisted his wrist at an awkward angle. "Shit," he hissed, backing away and cradling his arm. "Medical's sending someone over," Tyler called from the sidelines. Jake sat on a bench, wincing as he rotated his wrist experimentally. Darius was nearby, wiping down equipment. Without speaking, he approached and held out a small ice pack from his maintenance cart. "Pressure point here," Darius said quietly, pointing to a specific spot on Jake's forearm, about 2 inches below the wrist. "Press while icing, reduces swelling faster." Jake snatched the ice pack. "What would you know about it, old man? You clean toilets for a living?" Darius didn't react to the disrespect. He simply nodded once and returned to his work. That evening, long after the facility had emptied, Darius sat alone in the locker room. He held a photograph, worn around the edges from handling. It showed a younger version of himself in full combat gear, surrounded by a SEAL team. His eyes moved over each face, and his lips formed names in silent recitation. A ritual of remembrance: Williams, Thompson, Rodriguez, Bakari, Johnson. Pain flickered across his features, deep and raw, as his fingers traced the image of a young man who shared his eyes, his jawline. Then, with careful reverence, he tucked the photo away and resumed his duties. The moment of vulnerability sealed away as tightly as his past. As the days passed, the tension between Jake and Darius grew. Jake, inexplicably bothered by the janitor's quiet dignity, began involving more recruits in his mockery. "Here comes Private Mop," he'd say when Darius entered a room. The nickname caught on among some of the cockier trainees, though others remained respectful or simply indifferent. One Tuesday morning, as Darius worked near the entrance, a visitor arrived. The man wore the full dress uniform of a Navy admiral, his chest adorned with rows of service ribbons and medals. Despite being in his 60s, he carried himself with unmistakable authority. When he spotted Darius, something unusual happened. The admiral stopped, straightened slightly, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Darius returned the gesture with equal subtlety. Jake, watching from the pull-up station, narrowed his eyes. The exchange lasted less than 2 seconds, but it was unmistakable, a sign of mutual respect between equals, not the dismissive greeting of a superior to maintenance staff. Later that day, during a strength training session, one of the cable machines malfunctioned, a pin slipping from its housing and causing the weight stack to drop with a dangerous clang. "Clear the area," Captain Ramirez ordered, approaching the machine cautiously. Darius appeared with his toolbox, moving with unexpected quickness despite his limp. "Tension springs gone," he said, already opening the weight stack housing with practiced ease. "Happens when the pivot point wears down." His hands moved with surgical precision, disassembling the mechanism with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. As he worked, he explained the mechanical failure using terms that belonged more in a military briefing than a maintenance report. "Friction coefficient exceeded tolerance at the load-bearing junction," he said, replacing a small part from his kit. "Should hold now, but you'll want to red tag it for a full replacement. Metal fatigue shows microfractures that could cascade under maximum load." Captain Ramirez stared at him, her professional mask slipping just enough to show surprise. "That's very thorough, Mr. Cole." Darius seemed to catch himself, his expression closing like a door. "Just doing my job, ma'am." That night, Darius dreamed. Not the peaceful sleep of the innocent, but the fractured, violent images of combat. In his dream, he led a unit through dense jungle, hand signals directing their silent movement. His younger self moved with lethal grace, eyes constantly scanning for threats, weapon ready. His men followed with absolute trust, a well-oiled machine of human capability. Then the dream shifted to screaming helicopter rotors, the urgent chatter of radio communication, the metallic taste of fear as something went catastrophically wrong. He woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, the echo of a name dying on his lips. Jake Matthews couldn't shake his growing obsession with the quiet janitor. Something about Cole's demeanor, the way he carried himself, the silent dignity that never cracked under mockery. It needled at Jake in ways he couldn't articulate. "Hey, Private Mop," Jake called across the weight room the next day. "You missed a spot over by the dumbbells." Several trainees laughed, but fewer than before. Some had begun to notice what Jake had. There was something off about the janitor's humble act. The way his eyes tracked movement in a room, the economy of his motions, the perfect awareness of his surroundings at all times. Darius merely nodded and redirected his cleaning, face impassive as always. "Man, I'm talking to you," Jake persisted, approaching now. "What's with the attitude?" "No attitude, sir," Darius replied quietly. "Just doing my job." "Sir?" Jake mocked. "You think you're in the military now, old man? Playing soldier with your little mop?" Tyler tugged at Jake's arm. "Come on, man, leave it alone." But Jake shook him off, stepping closer to Darius. "What's your deal anyway? You walk around here like you own the place, but you're just a janitor." What? You couldn't cut it in the real world? Darius finally met Jake's eyes, and something in that gaze made Jake take an involuntary step back. There was no anger there, no wounded pride. Just a calm assessment that somehow made Jake feel like he was the one being evaluated and found wanting. We all serve in different ways, Darius said simply, then returned to his work. That night, after everyone had left, Jake made a decision. He'd had enough of the mystery. Using the key card he'd borrowed from one of the administrative assistants, he slipped into the records office after hours. The personnel files were kept in a locked cabinet, but Jake had learned a few tricks during his time in training. The lock popped open with minimal effort, and he began rifling through the folders until he found one labeled Cole D. Unlike the digital file Captain Ramirez had accessed, the physical folder contained several pages, though many sections were heavily redacted. As Jake flipped through, his confusion grew. There were award citations with classified seals, service records with dates and locations blacked out, and a photograph that made his blood run cold. It showed a much younger Darius Cole, dressed in full combat gear, standing beside a man Jake immediately recognized, Medal of Honor recipient Michael Thornton. They weren't just posing for a photo. They stood with the easy familiarity of comrades, arms around each other's shoulders. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, continuing to flip through the pages. The next morning, his patience finally snapped. He cornered Darius in the locker room, waving a crumpled photocopy of the picture he'd found. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, his voice echoing off the metal lockers. "This is you with Thornton. Are you some kind of fraud? What's your game here?" Darius looked at the photo, then at Jake. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, a door closing. "You shouldn't have that," he said quietly. "Answer me," Jake insisted. Darius simply looked at him, his gaze level and unblinking, then walked away without another word. Jake slammed his fist into a locker, the metal clanging loudly in the empty room. "Damn it!" Captain Ramirez had been watching the escalating tension with growing concern. After witnessing Jake's outburst, she decided it was time for intervention. She found Darius in the equipment storage room, carefully organizing weight clamps by size. "We need to talk, Mr. Cole," she said, closing the door behind her. Darius straightened, his face carefully neutral. "Ma'am? Why are you hiding?" she asked directly. "I've worked with enough operators to know one when I see one. You're not just a janitor." For a long moment, Darius said nothing. Then, so quietly, she almost missed it. Regret. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with untold stories. Ramirez waited for more, but Darius had already returned to his task, the conversation clearly over in his mind. That night, in his small apartment, Darius's sleep was troubled again. He dreamed of a mission gone wrong, a helicopter landing zone suddenly erupting in gunfire, radio communications failing. At the critical moment, the sickening realization that extraction was compromised, he saw faces of men looking to him for orders, for salvation. He heard himself giving commands, saw his team moving with practiced precision even as the situation deteriorated. Then came the explosion, the horrific sound of a rocket-propelled grenade finding its target, the helicopter spinning out of control. The radio crackled with final transmissions, calls for help that would never be answered. The terrible silence that followed. Darius woke with a gasp, his body rigid with tension, sweat soaking through his shirt. He sat up, head in his hands, breathing through the panic that never fully subsided, even after all these years. Meanwhile, Jake's attitude was undergoing a subtle shift. During an underwater endurance test, one of the most challenging elements of SEAL training, he'd struggled more than expected. Later, in the locker room, he overheard a conversation between two younger recruits. "No way I would have passed that test without help," said one, a slim young man named Alex Watson. "What kind of help?" asked his friend. "That janitor, Cole. He saw me practicing my breathing technique last week, told me I was doing it wrong, showed me this Navy diver trick for extending lung capacity, said it saved his life once in the Persian Gulf." Jake frowned, toweling off his hair as he eavesdropped. "The guy with the limp? For real?" "Yeah, called it the 4-count bubble." Man knows his stuff. Passed the test thanks to him. Jake closed his locker quietly, deep in thought. As Darius prepared to leave the facility that evening, he opened his personal locker in the maintenance room, a simple metal cabinet separated from the trainee area. Inside, carefully hidden behind cleaning supplies and spare uniforms, was a small wooden box. He opened it briefly, running his fingers over the contents. A SEAL Trident plaque, worn with age but polished to a soft glow. A purple heart medal, nestled in velvet, and a folded uniform piece with lieutenant commander insignia. Most telling was a dog tag, hanging from a chain coiled neatly in the corner. The stamped medal read simply, Cole, D. He closed the box and the locker, unaware that Captain Ramirez had seen him from the doorway. She withdrew silently, her suspicions confirmed. The next day, during a heavy equipment moving session, Darius was helping rearrange weight racks when his shirt shifted, exposing the back of his neck more fully. The SEAL Trident tattoo, partially visible before, was now clearly displayed. Not some cheap imitation, but a masterfully executed piece, aged with his skin but still crisp in detail. It wasn't just any trident, it contained a small serial number beneath it, a practice common among certain SEAL teams to identify their specific unit. Chief Instructor Warner, a retired SEAL in his 50s who occasionally supervised training, happened to be walking by. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the tattoo with shock of recognition. His coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Cole? Darius Cole?" Darius froze, slowly turning to face the man. For the first time since arriving at the facility, a flicker of emotion crossed his features, something between resignation and recognition. Warner approached slowly, as if seeing a ghost. "It can't be. They said you were MIA after Kandahar." The two men stared at each other, decades of shared history hanging in the air between them. Finally, Darius gave a small nod of acknowledgement. "Hello, Chief," he said quietly. "Been a while." Jake, working nearby, witnessed the exchange with growing confusion. Who exactly was this janitor that a decorated SEAL instructor would look at him with such stunned respect? Warner shook his head in disbelief. "Phantom Shadow. Of all the people. Why are you mopping floors, for God's sake?" Darius's expression closed again. "It's quiet work. Lets me think." By now, several trainees had gathered, drawn by the unusual intensity of the moment. Warner noticed their curious stares and made a decision. "Everyone in the classroom in 5 minutes," he announced. "There's a history lesson you all need to hear." 20 minutes later, the training room was packed. Every recruit and several instructors had squeezed in, an unusual buzz of anticipation filling the air. Darius was nowhere to be seen. Chief Warner stood at the front, his normally gruff demeanor subdued by something like reverence. "You've all been training alongside a ghost," he began. "Some of you have been mocking him, calling him Private Mop. Shows what you know." He pulled up a photograph on the projector screen. A much younger Darius Cole in full combat gear, face streaked with camouflage paint, eyes alert and focused. Lieutenant Commander Darius Cole, call sign Phantom, leader of SEAL Team 6's Shadow Unit during some of the most classified operations of the last 30 years. 100% mission completion rate, 100% team survival rate. A murmur ran through the room. "Until Kandahar 2009, Warner continued, his voice dropping. "A mission went catastrophically wrong. Communications failed. Extraction was compromised. Half the team was lost. Cole was listed as missing in action, presumed dead." Jake sat frozen, the implications of his behavior toward Darius hitting him like a physical blow. "Cole's unit wasn't just any SEAL team," Warner continued. "They were the ones called when no one else could get the job done. The missions that officially never happened. The operations so classified that most admirals didn't know about them." He switched to another photo. Darius receiving a medal from a high-ranking official, the ceremony apparently taking place in some anonymous briefing room rather than with public ceremony. That tattoo on his neck, that specific trident, only 20 men in SEAL history have worn it. Most are dead. The rest are legends. The room had fallen completely silent. So the next time you think about disrespecting the man cleaning this facility, Warner concluded, his eyes finding Jake's, remember, you're talking to someone who's forgotten more about combat than you'll likely ever learn. As the briefing ended, the recruits filed out in subdued silence. The atmosphere had shifted palpably. The next morning, when Darius arrived for his shift, he found small signs of change. A protein shake left on his maintenance cart. A quiet nod of acknowledgement from a trainee who had previously ignored him. Most telling was the absence of the nickname, Private Mop. Jake struggled with what to do. Shame wasn't an emotion he was accustomed to feeling, but it sat heavy in his chest now. After days of internal debate, he approached Darius as he worked alone in the equipment room. "Sir," Jake began, the honorific now genuine. "I owe you an apology. I've been disrespectful. I didn't know who you were." Darius continued organizing equipment, his movements unhurried. "Don't respect me," he said finally. "Respect the uniform, whether it's worn or not." Jake nodded, unsure what else to say. As he turned to leave, Darius spoke again. "Your father was a SEAL?" Jake stopped, surprised. "How did you know? The way you carry yourself, the chip on your shoulder. Seen it before." Jake hesitated, then admitted, "I'm trying to live up to his reputation. He thinks I won't make it." Darius nodded once. "Hardest missions are the ones we set for ourselves." Jake, left with the strange feeling he'd just received both wisdom and a challenge, wrapped in a single cryptic statement from a man who'd seen more war than Jake could imagine. The days following Chief Warner's revelation brought subtle yet profound changes to the training facility. The story of Darius Cole, the legendary SEAL hidden in plain sight, spread through the ranks like wildfire. Trainees who had once walked past him without a glance now watched him with a mixture of awe and curiosity, trying to reconcile the quiet janitor with the warrior Warner had described. Morning sunlight streamed through the high windows of the weight room as Darius worked, his movements methodical as always. He was restocking sanitizing wipes when a weight plate slipped from a nearby trainee's grip, clattering to the floor. The sudden noise caused several people to jump, but Darius didn't even flinch. His body remained perfectly still, only his eyes moving to assess the source of the sound, a reaction born from decades in combat zones. Travis Miller, one of the younger recruits, approached Darius hesitantly. "Sir, I just wanted to say it's an honor to train in the same facility as you." Darius looked up, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he nodded once. "Thank you, son. Focus on your training." Throughout the day, Darius found small tokens of respect appearing around him. A fresh coffee left by his maintenance cart, a protein bar placed next to his toolbox, a note with simply, "Thank you for your service," written in blocky handwriting. He accepted these offerings with quiet dignity, neither encouraging nor discouraging the attention. Captain Ramirez watched this transformation with thoughtful eyes. She found Jake alone in the recovery room, icing his shoulder after a particularly grueling training session. "Quite the change around here," she commented, leaning against the doorframe. Jake nodded, his expression troubled. "I've been such an ass." "Yes, you have," Ramirez agreed without hesitation. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I tried to apologize. He basically told me to focus on respecting the uniform, not him personally." Ramirez smiled slightly. "Sounds like Cole. This isn't about making yourself feel better for being wrong, Matthews. It's about learning why you were wrong in the first place." Later that afternoon, disaster struck during a routine training exercise. A young recruit named Eric Foster collapsed. During an endurance drill, his breathing suddenly labored, face turning an alarming shade of blue. "He's having an asthma attack," someone shouted. "I thought he said it was under control." The instructors froze momentarily. Medical emergencies during SEAL training were handled carefully, as the line between pushing through pain and dangerous medical conditions was sometimes blurry. Darius appeared from nowhere, moving with a speed that belied his age and his limp. He knelt beside Foster, assessed him with a single glance, and took immediate action. "Anaphylaxis, not asthma," he said, his voice suddenly carrying the unmistakable command presence of an officer. His lips are swelling. EpiPen in the medical kit. Now! When the instructor hesitated, Darius didn't wait. He moved to the emergency medical cabinet himself, punched in the code as if he'd known it all along, and returned with an epinephrine injector. With practiced precision, he administered the shot to Foster's thigh, then positioned the young man to maximize his airway. "Ambulance is 3 minutes out," reported one of the staff. Darius nodded, his fingers on Foster's pulse. He had shellfish at lunch. Need to note that in his file, it's not in there now. He continued monitoring the recruit's vital signs, making small adjustments to his position, speaking in low, reassuring tones until the medical team arrived. Everyone in the room had witnessed a transformation. The janitor had vanished, replaced by a combat medic who clearly had extensive experience treating battlefield injuries. The authority in his voice, the confidence in his movements. This was Darius Cole, SEAL Commander. As the paramedics took over, Darius stepped back, and the mantle of command seemed to slide from his shoulders. He quietly returned to his maintenance cart, resuming his work as if nothing extraordinary had happened. That evening, Captain Ramirez found Darius alone in the equipment room. She closed the door behind her. "My father was Black Ops," she said without preamble. "He never talked about it. Had nightmares until the day he died. Carried whatever happened out there like a weight around his neck." Darius continued organizing the equipment, but she knew he was listening. "He used to say that the thing about classified operations is that the victories stay secret, but the failures haunt you in public." Darius's hands stilled momentarily. "There's honor in what you carry, Cole," Ramirez said quietly. "But there's also honor in letting others help carry it." "Is that what your father did?" Darius asked, his voice low. "No. He drank himself to death instead." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Don't make his mistake." After she left, Darius stood motionless for a long time, lost in thought. The next day, Jake was surprised when Darius approached him in the locker room. They were alone, the rest of the trainees having already left for the day's exercises. "You wanted to know who I am," Darius said, his voice steady but quiet. "Sit down." Jake complied immediately, feeling the weight of the moment. Operation Kingfisher, 2009. My team was sent to extract a high-value intelligence asset from Kandahar. Communications were compromised from the start, but we proceeded anyway. The mission parameters were too important to abort. Darius's eyes took on a faraway look as he continued. "Satellite link failed during extraction. Our position was compromised. RPG hit our helicopter as we were loading. 4 men died instantly, 3 more during the firefight that followed." Jake listened in stunned silence as Darius methodically recounted the events, his voice never wavering despite the obvious pain behind the words. "I was team leader. My call to proceed despite the communications issues. My responsibility." He paused, the weight of memory pressing down. "Command conducted a full investigation, cleared me of wrongdoing, said it was equipment failure, not human error. But I know different. I missed something. Should have scrubbed the mission." "But if communications were already compromised," Jake began. "When you lead men into battle, there's no room for excuses," Darius cut him off. "Only results. 7 men didn't come home. That's the only metric that matters." The stark honesty of the statement hit Jake hard. After I recovered from my injuries, I couldn't go back to the teams, couldn't lead men again, but I couldn't leave this life entirely either. Darius gestured vaguely to indicate the facility around them. "So I found a middle path. I watch. I maintain. I remember." Jake struggled to find words. "Thank you for telling me," he finally managed. Darius shook his head. "I didn't tell you for thanks. Told you so you understand. Respecting the uniform means respecting what it demands. Sometimes it demands everything." Later that week, Jake organized a secret project with the other trainees. They worked after hours, consulting with Chief Warner and Captain Ramirez, gathering materials and information clandestinely. On a quiet Sunday evening, when the facility was nearly empty, they asked Darius to come to the main training hall. He entered cautiously, limping slightly more than usual after a long day. The lights were dimmed, and for a moment, he could only see silhouettes of people standing in formation. Then, the lights came up, revealing what they had built. A memorial wall for his fallen team. 7 photographs in simple frames, names engraved on brass plates, each image surrounded by a soft halo of LED light. The current trainees stood at attention before it with Jake at their center. "The men of Operation Kingfisher," Jake said formally. "No longer forgotten, no longer classified, remembered here by those who follow in their footsteps." Darius stood, frozen, staring at the faces of his lost brothers in arms. For a man so controlled, so measured in every response, what happened next was shocking to witness. His composure cracked, then shattered completely. His shoulders began to shake, and tears spilled freely down his weathered cheeks. He approached the memorial slowly, reaching out to touch each photograph with trembling fingers. "Williams," he whispered. "Thompson, Bakari, Johnson." His fingers lingered on the last photo, a young man with his same eyes, his same determined expression. Cole, Marcus Cole. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. The lost SEAL had been Darius's son. No one moved as Darius knelt before the memorial, his grief finally finding expression after years of silent burden. The trainees maintained their respectful formation, bearing witness to a father's long-delayed mourning, understanding now the true weight he had carried all these years. In that moment of vulnerability, something shifted in the atmosphere of the facility. A new understanding of what it truly meant to serve, to lead, to lose, and somehow to continue. The quiet janitor had become something else entirely in their eyes, a living testament to both the glory and the cost of the path they had chosen. A week passed following the memorial ceremony. Darius maintained his regular schedule, cleaning and maintaining the facility with the same quiet efficiency as always. But small changes were evident to those who looked closely. He stood a little straighter, made eye contact more readily, occasionally offered a brief word of advice to struggling trainees. The memorial wall had been given a permanent place in the Hall of Honor, with official approval from command. What had begun as an unauthorized tribute was now recognized as an important reminder of sacrifice for all who trained in the facility. Jake found Darius in the equipment room early one morning, carefully calibrating the weight machines. "Sir," Jake began, "I have a request. A big one." Darius looked up, his expression neutral but attentive. "Would you consider training me?" "Us, actually. A small group, after hours." Darius returned to his calibration work. "You have instructors, Matthews. Good ones." "Not like you," Jake persisted. "Not with your experience. There are things you know that aren't in any training manual." "And what makes you think I want to teach them?" Jake took a deep breath. "Because I think you miss it. Not the combat, but the purpose. The chance to make sure the next generation does it right." Darius's hands stilled. He was silent for a long moment before responding. "No ego," he said finally. "Only effort. That's my condition." Jake nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. Whatever you say. I'll think about it," Darius replied, which wasn't quite a yes but was far from a no. True to his word, 3 days later, Darius appeared in the training room after hours. Jake had gathered 5 other trainees, the ones who had shown genuine respect rather than just curiosity about Darius's past. Among them were Travis Miller, the young recruit who'd first approached Darius, and Eric Foster, now recovered from his allergic reaction. What followed was unlike any training they had experienced. Darius didn't shout or demand. He demonstrated, corrected, and explained with the patience of a man who understood that true mastery came from understanding, not just repetition. "Breathe from here," he instructed, placing a hand just below his diaphragm. "Not your chest, your power center, your life center." He taught them techniques for maintaining calm under pressure, methods for extending endurance beyond normal limits, ways of moving that conserved energy while maximizing effect. Some were official SEAL tactics. Others were clearly hard-won personal innovations from years in the field. The training continued for weeks, the small group meeting whenever schedules allowed. Jake absorbed everything like a sponge, finding in Darius the mentor he had always craved but never found in his own father. One evening, as they were finishing a particularly grueling session on situational awareness, a man entered the gym unannounced. Tall and imposing, with the lean, predatory physique of a career operator, he moved with the arrogant confidence of someone accustomed to intimidating others. "Well, well," the newcomer drawled, slow applause echoing through the room. "The great phantom, reduced to teaching baby seals how to do jumping jacks." Darius straightened, his expression hardening. Briggs, the tension that instantly filled. The room was palpable. The trainees looked between the two men, sensing the history crackling like electricity in the air. Commander Richard Briggs, the man introduced himself to the trainees with a mocking half-bow. Former SEAL, current defense contractor, and former subordinate of the legendary Lieutenant Commander Cole. "What do you want, Briggs?" Darius asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Just visiting old haunts, checking on old friends." Briggs's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Imagine my surprise when I heard the great phantom had resurfaced as a janitor." "We're in the middle of training," Darius said. "If you'll excuse us." "Always the professional," Briggs mocked. "Tell me, does your little class know what really happened in Kandahar? The real reason those men died?" The trainees tensed, looking to Darius, who remained perfectly still. "That's enough." Jake stepped forward, but Darius held up a hand to stop him. "It's fine," Darius said quietly. "Mr. Briggs was just leaving." Briggs laughed. "Still giving orders, even with a mop in your hand?" He moved closer to Darius, lowering his voice. "How long do you think your hero status will last once the media hears what really happened that day? How the great phantom shadow froze when it mattered most?" "Make your threats and go," Darius said, his voice still steady. Briggs smirked, handed Darius a business card and walked out, confidence in every step. After he left, the room remained silent until Foster spoke up. "Sir, who was that?" "Someone from the past," Darius replied, pocketing the card. "Let's get back to work." But the encounter had shaken something loose. The trainees could see it in the tight set of Darius's shoulders, the distant look in his. First, while the session ended early that night, Jake found Captain Ramirez in her office the next morning. "I need your help," he said without preamble. "It's about Commander Cole and someone named Briggs." Ramirez's expression darkened. "Richard Briggs. I know the name. What happened?" After Jake explained the confrontation, Ramirez sat back in her chair, fingers steepled. Briggs was on Cole's team in Kandahar, one of the survivors, left the Navy shortly after and went private. Makes a fortune now running security operations with questionable ethics. He threatened to go public with something about what happened in Kandahar, Jake pressed. Something that would hurt Cole's reputation. "The mission records are classified," Ramirez said, but her brow furrowed. "Though certain parties would have access." "Can we see them?" Jake asked. Ramirez gave him a measured look. "That's far above your clearance level, Matthews." "But not above yours," Jake countered. After a long pause, Ramirez nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do, but this stays between us. Understand?" For the next week, Jake noticed Darius seemed distracted during their evening sessions. The instruction continued, but something had changed, as if Briggs's appearance had reopened wounds that had just begun to heal. Meanwhile, Ramirez called in favors from former colleagues, discreetly requesting access to the classified files on Operation Kingfisher. What she and Jake discovered sent them racing to find Darius. They found him in the memorial hall standing before the photographs of his fallen team. "Cole," Ramirez said urgently, "we need to talk. About Kandahar. About Briggs." Darius turned, slowly. "Whatever you think you found." "The communications failure wasn't random," Jake interrupted. "The coordinates were altered by Briggs." Darius stared at them, his expression unreadable. "We have the proof," Ramirez continued, holding up a flash drive. "The investigation missed it initially. The satellite logs show manual override of the coordinates from Briggs's terminal. He compromised the mission, Cole. not you. For a moment, Darius seemed unable to process this information. Years of self-blame had become so ingrained that the possibility of another explanation seemed almost impossible to accept. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. "Why would he do that?" "Money," Ramirez said grimly. "The intelligence asset you were extracting had information about opium trafficking. Briggs had side deals with local warlords. If that intel got out..." Darius closed his eyes, absorbing the devastating truth. When he opened them again, a new resolve had hardened his features. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Now we have a choice," Ramirez answered. "We can take this evidence to command, have Briggs investigated for treason and the deaths of 7 SEALs. Or we let it go," Darius finished quietly. "Protect the families from the media circus that would follow. Keep the memory of those men untarnished by scandal." "That's not justice," Jake protested. "Sometimes justice isn't the honorable path," Darius replied. "Sometimes protecting others is." The moral dilemma hung heavy in the air between them. The following days saw Darius pushing his small group of trainees harder than ever before. He designed a gauntlet that tested every skill he'd taught them: situational awareness, breath control, tactical decision-making under pressure, team coordination. "This isn't just physical," he told them as they prepared. "This is about making the right decisions when everything is falling apart around you." The gauntlet was brutal, but one by one the trainees completed it, with Jake setting a time that approached facility records. As they celebrated their achievement, Darius watched with quiet pride, not just in their physical accomplishment, but in the moral character they displayed throughout. That evening, as the facility quieted, Briggs returned. He found Darius, alone in the equipment room. "Thought about my offer?" Briggs asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Simple deal. You retire quietly to some fishing cabin in Montana. I keep what I know to myself." "I've been thinking about Kandahar," Darius said calmly, "about what really happened that day." Something flickered in Briggs's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps even fear. "Ancient history." "Not to the families of 7 dead SEALs," came Captain Ramirez's voice as she stepped into the room, followed by the base commander and 2 military police officers. "What is this?" Briggs demanded, straightening. "This is accountability," Darius said, his voice taking on the unmistakable authority of command once more. "Something you've avoided for too long." The base commander stepped forward. "Richard Briggs, you're being detained pending investigation into allegations of treason, sabotage of military communications, and complicity in the deaths of 7 Navy SEALs during Operation Kingfisher." As the MPs moved to escort Briggs out, he lunged at Darius. "You self-righteous bastard. You think this brings them back? You think this changes anything?" Darius didn't flinch. "No, it doesn't bring them back, but it honors their sacrifice with truth." After Briggs was taken away, the commander turned to Darius. "Command wants to make this right, Cole. Your record has been officially cleared. There will be a private ceremony tomorrow to reinstate your standing and present a commendation that's long overdue." Darius nodded, emotion briefly tightening his features before he regained control. The ceremony was small but significant. In the same memorial hall where the trainees had built their tribute, Darius stood at attention as his record was formally cleared, and a Distinguished Service Cross was pinned to his chest. The attendees included only those directly involved: Ramirez, Warner, the commander, and the small group of trainees who had trained under Darius. "The Navy acknowledges the grave injustice done to you, Lieutenant Commander Cole," the base commander said formally. "Your service record has been amended to reflect the truth of your actions and the valor you displayed under impossible circumstances." Afterward, as the small gathering dispersed, Jake approached Darius. "What will you do now, sir? They offered you reinstatement." Darius looked at the medal in his hand, then at the memorial wall with its 7 photographs. "That chapter is closed," he said quietly. "My mission's here now." "As a janitor?" Jake asked incredulously. Darius smiled slightly. "As whatever is needed." The next day, Jake found Darius in the training room, setting up equipment for the regular classes. From his pocket, Darius produced a small object, a weathered compass in a brass case. "This got me through 3 wars," he said, holding it out to Jake. "It's not fancy, not digital, but it's true." Jake accepted the compass with reverence, understanding the weight of what was being passed to him. "Use it not to find your way," Darius said, his eyes holding Jake's, "but to stay true when you do." As Jake closed his hand around the compass, he felt the circle complete, from mockery to respect, from arrogance to humility, from directionless ambition to purposeful dedication. In the quiet janitor, he had found not just a mentor but a model for the kind of leader, the kind of man he hoped to become. And Darius Cole, who had spent years hiding in shadows of guilt and regret, stepped fully into the light. Not as a returned hero, but as something perhaps more valuable, a living bridge between the honored past and the promising future of the service that had defined his life. 3 weeks after the ceremony that cleared his name, Darius sat across from Admiral William Hargrove in the base commander's office. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the newly polished lieutenant commander insignia that Darius now wore on his collar, a compromise between his past rank and current role. "The offer stands, Cole," Admiral Hargrove said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Full reinstatement to active duty, assignment of your choosing. Or if you prefer the private sector, Northrop Grumman is offering a consulting position that would triple your current salary." He tapped the folder. "All. The details are in there." Darius glanced at the folder but didn't open it. "I appreciate the offers, Admiral, but that chapter is over. My mission's here now." Hargrove leaned back, studying the man before him. "As a janitor, with your experience, your record?" "As whatever is needed," Darius replied, echoing the words he'd spoken to Jake. The Admiral's intercom buzzed. "Sir, Captain Ramirez is here as requested." "Send her in," Hargrove responded. Captain Ramirez entered, her uniform crisp, her posture perfect. She nodded respectfully to both men. "Admiral, Commander." "Captain Ramirez has an interesting proposal," Hargrove said, gesturing for her to continue. Ramirez turned to Darius. "Command is exploring a new training initiative. We're calling it Phantom Doctrine for now. A mentorship program for SEAL. Candidates who fail out of BUD-S, not because of physical limitations, but because of mental barriers." Darius raised an eyebrow, his interest clearly piqued. "We lose too many good prospects," Ramirez continued. "Men and women with physical capabilities and tactical instincts who hit walls with the psychological aspects of training. Performance, anxiety, decision paralysis, inability to function optimally under extreme stress." "And you want my input on this program?" Darius asked. "We want you to lead it," Hargrove interjected. "Officially, as the inaugural director of Phantom Doctrine, a training division focused on the mental and emotional aspects of becoming a SEAL." For a long moment, Darius was silent, processing the offer. Finally, he spoke. "Who would I report to?" "The program would be under my overall supervision," Ramirez answered. "But you'd have significant autonomy in designing the curriculum and training methods." Darius nodded slowly. "I'd need to hand-select the candidates." "Naturally," Hargrove agreed. "And full discretion to develop unconventional training protocols?" "Within safety parameters, yes," Ramirez confirmed. Darius stood and extended his hand. "Then I accept." The handshake sealed more than a job offer. It represented Darius's full reintegration into the world he had tried to leave behind, but on his own terms. Not as a combatant, but as a teacher. Not defined by his past failures, but by the wisdom those failures had forged. The first person Darius recruited wasn't a trainer or a psychologist. It was Jake Matthews. "Me?" Jake asked incredulously when Darius approached him after training. "I'm not even through BUD-S yet." "You will be," Darius said with quiet certainty. "And then I want you as my assistant instructor for the first Phantom Doctrine cohort." Jake stared at him. "Why me? I was the one who treated you the worst when—" "You were." "When I was hiding," Darius finished for him. "That's precisely why." You've made the journey from arrogance to humility. That perspective is valuable. 2 months later, the first cohort of Phantom Doctrine trainees assembled in a converted warehouse, space at the edge of the base. The group was small, just 8 candidates who had washed out of Bud S despite showing promise. Among them was Amir Karim, a Muslim-American recruit who had faced subtle discrimination throughout his training, eroding his confidence despite his exceptional physical capabilities. Santiago Vasquez had frozen during an underwater exercise, developing severe performance anxiety that eventually led to his dismissal. Each trainee carried similar invisible burdens, psychological barriers that had proven more insurmountable than any physical challenge. Darius stood before them, his posture straight, his expression stern but not unkind. Jake stood to his right, clipboard in hand. "You're here because someone saw potential in you," Darius began, "and because that potential was derailed not by physical limitations, but by what goes on in here." He tapped his temple. "The mind is both the greatest weapon and the greatest vulnerability a warrior possesses." He paced slowly before them, making eye contact with each trainee. "This program isn't about second chances. It's about transformation. The physical challenges you'll face here aren't designed to test your strength or endurance. Those have already been proven. They're designed to create controlled chaos, to place you in situations where your mind becomes your enemy, so you can learn to make it your ally instead." The training protocols Darius developed were unlike anything in traditional SEAL preparation. He crafted exercises that deliberately triggered each trainee's specific psychological barriers, then taught techniques to overcome them. For Amir, who struggled with trust issues after experiencing prejudice, Darius created scenarios where success was impossible without completely trusting teammates. For Santiago, whose fear of drowning had become paralyzing, Darius gradually reintroduced underwater challenges with innovative breathing techniques and mental focusing exercises. Jake proved invaluable, relating to the trainees as someone still, going through Bud S himself, bridging the gap between Darius's experienced perspective and their immediate struggles. One evening, as Darius and Jake were reviewing the day's progress, a young aide interrupted them. "Sir, there's a situation developing with the program," the aide said nervously. "Some people from Washington are raising concerns." The situation became clear the next morning when Darius arrived to find Admiral Hargrove waiting with a grim expression. "We've got problems, Cole," Hargrove said without preamble. "Briggs's connections are pushing back. Hard." "What kind of pushback?" Darius asked. "The lobbying kind. The kind with deep pockets and congressional contacts." Hargrove handed Darius a tablet displaying an internal memo. "They're questioning the allocation of resources to an experimental program with unproven methodologies. They're also hinting that your involvement represents a security risk. Because of Kandahar, they're trying to leak redacted versions of your file to friendly media contacts, just enough to raise questions without providing context." Darius handed the tablet back, his expression unchanged. "Let them try. You don't understand, Cole. These are powerful people. Private security contractors, defense industry executives. Briggs may be facing charges, but his friends are still very much in play. With respect, Admiral, I've faced worse odds." Later that week, as Darius was leaving the base, a woman approached him in the parking lot. She was in her 30s, professionally dressed, with a press badge hanging around her neck. "Commander Cole, Rebecca Anderson, Virginia Times. I'd like to ask you about Operation Kingfisher and your current role training failed SEAL candidates." Darius paused, studying her carefully. "How did you find me?" "I'm good at my job," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I understand. You were recently cleared of responsibility for a mission that went tragically wrong. Now you're running a program that gives washouts a second chance. Quite a redemption story." "I'm not interested in being anyone's story, Ms. Anderson. The public has a right to know when millions of defense dollars are being allocated to experimental programs," she pressed, "especially when they're led by controversial figures." Darius was silent for a moment, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded toward a nearby bench. 5 minutes. The interview was brief and controlled. Darius answered her questions with measured responses, neither defensive nor expansive. When she asked about the details of Kandahar, he declined to comment on classified operations. When she pressed about the controversial nature of Phantom Doctrine, he explained the program's goals in straightforward terms. As the interview concluded, Anderson asked one final question. "Why is this program so important to you personally, Commander?" Darius looked directly into her eyes. "I'm not here to be famous, Ms. Anderson. I'm here to make sure no kid dies the way mine did." The statement hung in the air between them. Before she could ask a follow-up, Darius stood and walked away, leaving the journalist staring after him, her notebook forgotten in her lap. That evening, Jake found Darius sitting alone in the memorial hall, gazing at the photograph of Marcus Cole. "Sir?" Jake approached cautiously. "The trainees are asking about tomorrow's schedule." Darius nodded absently, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Jake hesitated, then sat beside him. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask." "In all our conversations, about Kandahar, about your son, you never mentioned he was under your command." Darius was silent for so long that Jake thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "Marcus graduated Bud S at the top of his class. Could have chosen any assignment. He requested mine." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Wanted to serve with the best," he said. "That must have been difficult. Commanding your own son. I was harder on him than anyone. Had to be." Darius's eyes never left the photograph. The day of the mission he questioned the communications issues, suggested we abort. His voice caught slightly. I overruled him. The weight of this revelation settled between them. Jake understood now the true burden Darius had been carrying. Not just the loss of men under his command, but the devastating knowledge that his own son had seen the danger that he had missed. "That's why this program matters so much," Jake realized aloud. "You're teaching what he tried to tell you." Darius nodded once, the simple gesture conveying volumes. Over the following weeks, the first cohort of Phantom Doctrine trainees began to show remarkable progress. Amir successfully completed a trust fall exercise from a 30-foot platform, his fear of betrayal finally conquered. Santiago broke through his aquatic anxiety in a grueling underwater maze challenge, emerging triumphant and tearful. Most telling was when one trainee, a former college football player named Derek Williams, had the phrase, "Still here," tattooed on his forearm. When Darius questioned it, Derek simply said, "It's what I tell myself now when I want to quit." As the program gained momentum, Admiral Hargrove brought news that headquarters had sent an observer, a stern, silent captain who watched training sessions without comment, taking meticulous notes before departing without offering any feedback. "What does it mean?" Jake asked Ramirez anxiously. "It means they're paying attention," she replied. "Whether that's good or bad remains to be seen." The answer came 3 days later. Ramirez burst into the training room, waving an official communique. "It's approved," she announced, her professional demeanor cracking with excitement. Phantom Doctrine is officially greenlit as a sanctioned training division with guaranteed funding for at least 3 years. The room erupted in cheers. Darius accepted handshakes and congratulations with his usual reserved dignity, but those who knew him well could see the satisfaction in his eyes. That evening, as the celebration wound down, Darius stood in the now empty training room, surveying what he had built. The janitor had become a commander again, by choice, not by title. The circle was complete, or so he thought. The success of Phantom Doctrine brought Darius a measure of peace, but the ghosts of his past were not so easily banished. As weeks passed and the program expanded, his nightmares returned with increasing frequency. Vivid recreations of Kandahar, but now with new and disturbing variations. Sometimes he saw Jake's face among the fallen instead of Marcus. Sometimes he heard his son's voice warning him of danger he could not see. He began arriving at the facility exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his movements lacking their usual precision. Both Jake and Captain Ramirez noticed the change, but were unsure how to approach it. Finally, Ramirez took action. She arranged for Darius to meet with Dr. Elaine Kim, a VA psychologist specializing in combat trauma, who had lost her own brother in Afghanistan. "I don't need a shrink," Darius protested when Ramirez informed him of the appointment. "Consider it a professional consultation," Ramirez countered. "For the program. Dr. Kim has valuable insights on psychological resilience that could benefit the trainees." It was a transparent excuse, but it gave Darius enough cover to agree without admitting he needed help. Dr. Kim was not what Darius expected. In her late 40s, with calm eyes and a direct manner, she made no attempt to psychoanalyze him when they met in her office at the VA hospital. "Captain Ramirez tells me you're doing important work," she said, pouring them both coffee. "I'd like to hear about it." They spent the first session discussing phantom doctrine, with Darius gradually warming to the topic as he explained his training philosophies. Only at the end did Dr. Kim broach the subject of his nightmares. "Combat trauma doesn't heal linearly," she told him. "Success in one area of life can sometimes trigger regression in others. The mind senses safety and finally processes what it couldn't before." Darius said nothing, but he returned the following week, and the week after that. Meanwhile, Jake's transformation continued. The once arrogant recruit had become a thoughtful, effective leader. Having successfully completed BUD/S, he dedicated himself fully to phantom doctrine, embodying the principles Darius had instilled in him. One weekend, Jake made a difficult journey to his father's home in Maryland. The modest house was unchanged from his childhood, down to the faded American flag flying out front. Frank Matthews opened the door with a surprised expression. At 62, he was a mirror of what Jake might become, still fit but weathered. His blonde hair now gray, his blue eyes sharp with the wariness of a man who had seen too much. "Jake." Frank's voice was gruff with emotion he wouldn't express. "Didn't expect you." "Hi, Dad," Jake replied, equally awkward. "Can I come in?" Their conversation was stilted at first, years of strained communication creating barriers neither knew how to breach. Frank had opposed Jake's decision to join the Navy, despite his own distinguished SEAL career. Or perhaps because of it. "Just wanted you to have options," Frank said as they sat in his living room. "Choices I didn't give myself." "I thought you were ashamed," Jake admitted, "that I wouldn't measure up." Frank shook his head slowly. "I was afraid. Afraid you'd become exactly what I was, a man who knew how to fight wars but not how to come home from them." As they talked, Jake shared stories of Darius, of phantom doctrine, of the lessons he was learning about leadership and purpose. Frank listened with growing interest. "Sounds like you found the mentor I should have been," he said finally. "He's taught me a lot," Jake agreed. "But I needed to hear some things from you, too." It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Too much had gone unsaid for too long, but it was a beginning. When Jake left, Frank hugged him awkwardly but sincerely. "I'm proud of you, son," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "Always have been." Back at the base, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Phantom Doctrine training facility. Jake was reviewing training schedules when a woman walked in, her resemblance to Darius immediately apparent despite her lighter complexion. In her early 40s, she carried herself with the same careful control, the same watchful awareness. "I'm looking for Darius Cole," she said, her voice betraying a slight tremor despite her composed expression. "He's in a meeting," Jake replied. "Can I help you?" "I'm Maya Bennett, his daughter." She met Jake's surprised look with a challenging stare. "I was told he died years ago." When Darius emerged from his meeting, he froze at the sight of Maya, his normally unreadable expression cracking to reveal shock and a complex mixture of emotions. "Maya," he breathed, her name almost a prayer on his lips. "They told me you were dead," she said without preamble. "For 15 years I thought you were dead." "It's complicated," Darius began. "Complicated?" Her voice rose slightly. "I mourned you. We both did. And now I find out you've been alive this whole time because I happened to see a newspaper article about some training program." Their reunion was tense, painful, Filled with 15 years of absence and misunderstanding, Maya had been told her father died in a classified operation, a falsehood Darius had allowed to stand after Kandahar, believing his disgrace would hurt his family more than his supposed death. After Marcus died, I couldn't, Darius struggled to explain. I thought it was better this way. Better for who? Maya demanded. Not for me, not for Isaiah. Isaiah? Darius looked confused. My son, your grandson. He's 10. The revelation hit Darius like a physical blow. A grandson he had never known existed. A child who had grown up without knowing him, just as he had been absent for much of Maya's own childhood due to his deployments. The next day, Maya returned with Isaiah, a serious-faced boy with Darius's eyes and quiet watchfulness. Unlike his mother, Isaiah showed no anger, only curiosity about the grandfather he was meeting for the first time. Mom says you were a SEAL, Isaiah said as they sat awkwardly in Darius's small office. Like Uncle Marcus was. Yes, Darius replied, unsure how to talk to this child who was both stranger and family. Did you know him? Uncle Marcus? The innocent question carried layers of complexity that Isaiah couldn't possibly understand. Darius looked to Maya, who nodded slightly, giving permission to speak of the painful past. I knew him very well, Darius said carefully. He was brave and smart, a good soldier, a better man. Isaiah nodded solemnly. Mom has pictures. She says I look like him sometimes. You do, Darius agreed, his voice softening. Around the eyes. The ice began to thaw, slowly but steadily. Maya's anger remained, but it was tempered by the recognition of her father's pain, his regret. For Isaiah's sake, they began to build a tentative relationship, finding common ground in the boy who connected them. Isaiah became a regular visitor to the training facility, watching wide-eyed as the Phantom Doctrine trainees ran drills and exercises. His interest in the military was obvious, his admiration for his grandfather growing with each visit. As Darius cautiously embraced his role as a grandfather, another unexpected development emerged. Young people from the surrounding community, mostly teenagers from rough neighborhoods, began appearing at the facility's perimeter, watching the training sessions with fascination. One afternoon, Jake approached a group of these onlookers. 5 boys between 14 and 17, clearly from difficult circumstances but drawn to the discipline and purpose they witnessed. You guys interested in what we do here? Jake asked. That old dude in charge, said one boy pointing to Darius across the yard. He for real? Like a real SEAL and all that? As real as they come, Jake confirmed. Think he'd show us some moves? Another boy asked, trying to sound casual but unable to hide his eagerness. Jake considered the request, then nodded. Let me talk to him. To everyone's surprise, Darius agreed to meet with the teenagers. What began as a one-time demonstration of basic self-defense techniques evolved into a regular community outreach program, with Darius and select Phantom Doctrine, trainees teaching discipline, focus, and controlled strength to local youth. This isn't about fighting, Darius told his young students. It's about knowing when not to fight, about having the confidence to walk away. The program gained attention from local media, casting a positive light on Phantom Doctrine and its founder. For a brief period, it seemed Darius had finally found his peace, reconnecting with family, serving his community, mentoring the next generation of warriors. Then Briggs struck his final blow. From his jail cell awaiting trial, Richard Briggs orchestrated his revenge. Through contacts still loyal to him, he leaked edited footage from the Kandahar operation, body camera video that showed moments of confusion and chaos, but carefully excluded the evidence of his own sabotage. The footage was edited to suggest Darius had hesitated at a critical moment, costing precious seconds that might have saved lives. The story exploded across military news outlets and quickly spread to mainstream media. Without context, the footage painted a damning picture. Phantom Doctrine's funding was frozen pending investigation. Protesters appeared outside the base, some carrying signs with Marcus Cole's image and the words, "Failed by leadership." The base received threatening messages. Trainees were harassed when they left the facility, Isaiah was bullied at school when classmates connected him to the controversy. Through it all, Darius maintained his dignity, refusing to engage with the media frenzy or defend himself publicly. But those closest to him could see the toll it took. The deepening lines around his eyes, the return of his pronounced limp, the weight that seemed to settle on his shoulders. "Fight back," Jake urged him. "Tell your side." "The truth isn't always enough," Darius replied wearily. "Sometimes the story people want to believe is stronger." "Then let me tell my story," Jake insisted, "as someone who's trained under you, someone who's seen who you really are." After careful consideration, Darius agreed. Jake recorded a video testimonial, speaking candidly about his own journey from arrogance to humility under Darius's guidance, about the values and principles that defined Phantom Doctrine. Jake's video sparked a movement. Other trainees added their voices. Former SEALs who had served with Darius in earlier operations came forward with stories of his leadership and integrity. Gradually, a counter-narrative emerged, challenging the simplistic villain portrait Briggs had tried to paint. The turning point came when a retired admiral, the same one who had nodded to Darius in the hallway months earlier, called a press conference. With cameras rolling, he unsealed the original black box recording from the Kandahar helicopter, complete with timestamp data that proved definitively that the communication failure occurred before Darius made the contested decision. "Lieutenant, Commander Cole acted with courage and sound judgment in an impossible situation created by sabotage," the admiral stated firmly. "Any suggestion to the contrary is not merely incorrect, but dishonors the sacrifice of the men who died that day, including Commander Cole's own son." The revelation that one of the fallen SEALs had been Darius's son changed the public narrative overnight. Protests turned to vigils. Criticism became admiration for a father who had continued to serve, despite such devastating personal loss. In a final, powerful gesture of reconciliation, the Secretary of Defense held a nationally televised ceremony at the Naval Special Warfare Command Headquarters. There, before an audience that included Maya and Isaiah, Jake and his father, and the families of the men lost in Kandahar, Darius received a second medal and an official apology from the Department of Defense. "Today, we not only honor the exceptional service of Lieutenant Commander Darius Cole," the secretary said, "but we also acknowledge the institutional failure that compounded his personal tragedy. In doing so, we reaffirm our commitment to the truth, however difficult it may be to face." As Darius stood at attention, the medal being pinned to his chest, he caught Isaiah's eye in the audience. The boy sat straight-backed, proud, watching his grandfather with undisguised admiration. Beside him, Maya wiped away tears, her anger finally giving way to understanding and forgiveness. In that moment, as past shadows receded and present light shone through, Darius felt a weight lift. Not completely, perhaps never completely, but enough to stand taller, to breathe deeper, to look toward the future with something approaching hope. The circle of pain that had begun in Kandahar wasn't broken, but it had been transformed into something else, a legacy of resilience, of truth, of service that transcended personal glory or redemption. A legacy now carried forward not just by Darius himself, but by Jake, by the Phantom Doctrine trainees, by Isaiah, and by all those whose lives they would touch in turn. 6 months after the Secretary of Defense's public apology, Phantom Doctrine had evolved from an experimental program to a respected training division. The facility had expanded, now occupying a dedicated compound on the base with specialized equipment designed to Darius's specifications. The training staff had grown to include psychologists, former operators with combat trauma experience, and meditation specialists. An unconventional team for an unconventional approach to warrior preparation. Jake Matthews stood at the front of the briefing room, outlining the final challenge for the first full class of Phantom Doctrine graduates. At 25, he carried himself with a confidence that no longer needed to announce itself, the quiet assurance of a man who had found his purpose. Hell Week is the traditional crucible for SEAL candidates, Jake explained to the assembled trainees. Commander Cole has designed something different, equally demanding but focused on decision-making under pressure rather than mere physical endurance. The 10 candidates listened intently, their faces showing both anticipation and nervousness. They had all been through traditional SEAL training before washing out, but Phantom Doctrine had transformed them. Amir Karim now led team exercises with natural authority, his previous trust issues replaced by an intuitive understanding of team dynamics. Santiago Vasquez had conquered his aquatic anxiety so completely that he now specialized in underwater operations. The challenge will last 72 hours, Jake continued. You'll face physical obstacles, tactical problems, and ethical dilemmas. You'll be sleep-deprived, hungry, and uncomfortable, just like in real operations. From the back of the room, Darius observed silently. The past 6 months had changed him as well. Regular sessions with Dr. Kim had helped him process his trauma. Time with Maya and Isaiah had softened some of his harder edges. He still moved with the watchful precision of a lifetime operator, but there was an ease to him now that had been absent before. One final note, Jake concluded. There's a storm system approaching the coast. Command has suggested postponing the exercise until it passes. All eyes turned to Darius, who stepped forward to address the group. The world won't wait for sunshine, he said simply. The challenge proceeds as planned. The first day of the challenge pushed the trainees to their physical limits, a 20-mile movement through difficult terrain, while solving tactical problems and responding to simulated ambushes. The second day tested their technical skills and teamwork under sleep deprivation. By the third day, as they approached the final phase, exhaustion had set in exactly as planned. What wasn't planned was the Category 3 hurricane that intensified unexpectedly offshore, bringing stronger winds and heavier rain than forecasted. As the storm worsened, Admiral Hargrove called Darius directly. "Cole, we need to abort. Weather Service is reporting flash flood warnings throughout the region." Darius stood in the command center, monitoring his trainees' progress through GPS trackers. "They're handling it, Admiral. This is exactly the kind of unpredictable element they need to experience." "This isn't about the training anymore," Hargrove insisted. "We're getting reports that the Millers Creek Dam is showing signs of stress. If it fails, the rural communities downstream will be in immediate danger." Darius fell silent, weighing the situation. After a moment, he responded, "Send me the coordinates and the evacuation orders. I'll inform the team." Instead of calling his trainees back to base, however, Darius gathered his key staff, Jake, Ramirez, and 2 senior instructors, and laid out a new plan. "The dam situation changes things," he explained, pointing to a map of the affected area. "We have civilians potentially in harm's way, with emergency services stretched thin across multiple crisis points." "Are we aborting the challenge?" Jake asked. "No," Darius replied. "We're evolving it. This is no longer a training exercise. It's a real-world operation." An hour later, Darius stood before his trainees in a muddy field, rain pelting down around them. Despite their exhaustion, they formed a perfect semicircle, alert and focused. "The situation has changed," Darius announced, raising his voice over the howling wind. "The Millers Creek Dam is failing. Evacuation orders have been issued, but local emergency services are overwhelmed. There are families in the flood path who may not get out in time." The trainees exchanged glances, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Command has offered us transportation back to base," Darius continued, "or we can divert to assist with evacuation efforts. This isn't training. This is life. What you do now, you'll carry forever." He paused, looking each trainee in the eye. "I'm not ordering this mission. I'm asking for volunteers." Without hesitation, all 10 trainees stepped forward. "Never doubted it," Darius said with the ghost of a smile. "Gear up. We move in 10. The next 18 hours became the true final test for the Phantom Doctrine trainees. Working alongside local emergency responders, they evacuated stranded families from rapidly rising waters, improvised rescue equipment, and coordinated efforts across multiple locations. Amir led a team securing evacuation routes, using his newfound leadership skills to direct traffic and manage panicked civilians. Santiago waded through chest-deep water to reach a family trapped in a flooded home. His fear of water now transformed into expertise that saved lives. Jake coordinated operations from a makeshift command post, liaising between the trainees and Local authorities with a calm efficiency that impressed even the most seasoned emergency workers. As night fell, the situation worsened. The dam had partially failed, sending a surge of water through the valley. Reports came in of a family trapped in a remote farmhouse, an elderly couple and their grandchildren cut off by rising waters. "I'll take this one," Darius said, gearing up despite having been awake for nearly 30 hours. "Not alone," Jake insisted, joining him. What they didn't realize was that Isaiah had arrived at the evacuation center earlier with Maya, who was volunteering with the Red Cross. When no one was watching, the 10-year-old had slipped away, determined to see his grandfather in action. He had followed Darius and Jake at a distance, his small form hidden by rain gear too large for his frame. The farmhouse was already partially submerged when they arrived. Darius and Jake waded through the rising water, calling out to the trapped family. They found the elderly couple and their 2 grandchildren huddled in an upstairs bedroom, terrified but unharmed. "We'll get you out," Darius assured them, his calm presence immediately reducing their panic. As they were helping the family into a rescue boat, a section of the barn roof collapsed nearby, the sound like a gunshot in the storm. Darius whipped around, his operator instincts instantly alert. That's when he saw him. Isaiah, standing frozen in the downpour, having emerged from his hiding place at the sound of the collapse. "Isaiah!" Darius shouted, his usual composure shattered by shock and fear. Before anyone could react, a secondary collapse sent a portion of the barn wall tumbling down. Darius moved with impossible speed, tackling Isaiah out of the path of the falling debris. They rolled through mud and water, Darius's body curled protectively around his grandson. When they came to a stop, Darius was pinned under a heavy wooden beam, his leg trapped at an unnatural angle. Despite the obvious pain, his first words were for Isaiah. "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" Isaiah, mud-streaked and terrified but unhurt, nodded wordlessly. Jake was at their side in seconds, already assessing the situation. "We need to get this off." "Him!" he called to the others. "Carefully!" With the combined effort of Jake, Isaiah, and the elderly grandfather they'd been rescuing, they managed to free Darius. His leg was badly injured, possibly broken, but in typical fashion he waved off immediate concern. "Complete the evacuation," he ordered through gritted teeth. "I can wait." "Not a chance, sir," Jake replied, already fashioning a stretcher from debris and rope. "Isaiah, I need your help. We're carrying your grandfather out together." The boy straightened, determination replacing fear on his young face. "Yes, sir." Together, they transported Darius through the floodwaters to the evacuation point where Maya waited in terrified anger and relief. As medical personnel took over, Jake turned to Isaiah. "You did good, kid. Real good." Isaiah beamed despite his mother's ongoing lecture about running off without permission. The rescue operation made national headlines. Images of the Phantom Doctrine trainees carrying children through floodwaters, helping elderly residents to safety, and working tirelessly alongside first responders captured the public's imagination. The same media outlets that had questioned Darius's record now praised his leadership and the program he had built. At a community center turned shelter, Isaiah surprised everyone by grabbing a microphone during a thank you ceremony organized by local officials. "My grandpa taught me that being brave isn't about not being scared," he said, his young voice steady despite the crowd. "It's about doing what's right even when you're scared. That's what I saw today. That's what a hero looks like." The simple wisdom from a child's perspective resonated more deeply than any official statement could have. As Darius recovered in the hospital, he received an unexpected visitor, Admiral Hargrove, accompanied by the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. "Hell of a training exercise, Cole," the commander said with grudging admiration. "Just applied what we teach, sir," Darius replied. The commander nodded thoughtfully. "We're expanding Phantom Doctrine, taking it global. Training centers in Virginia, California, and Hawaii to start." "Glad to hear it," Darius said. "We want Matthews to head up the new center in California," the commander continued. "With your recommendation, of course." Darius looked to Hargrove, who nodded confirmation. "Jake's more than ready," Darius said with quiet pride. Later that day, Jake visited, bringing news of his promotion and new assignment. California, Darius mused. Good surfing. I turned it down, Jake said, surprising him. Why would you do that? It's a career maker. Jake met his mentor's gaze steadily. Phantom Doctrine isn't just a program to me, it's a mission, and my mission is here, helping you expand what we've built. Darius studied the young man before him, no longer the arrogant recruit who had mocked a janitor, but a leader worthy of the highest respect. Some missions require sacrifice, Darius said carefully. Others require growth. Don't limit yourself out of loyalty to me. Jake considered this, then nodded slowly. I'll think about it. As he left, Darius watched him go with a mixture of pride and something like paternal love, a feeling he had thought lost to him forever after Marcus's death, now unexpectedly reborn. 1 year later, the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility had transformed. At the entrance stood a bronze statue depicting a team of SEALs in combat gear, positioned back-to-back in mutual protection. The plaque read simply, "The Silent Few, in honor of those who served quietly and saved loudly." The Phantom Doctrine program had expanded across 3 locations, with Jake Matthews heading the California division, as Darius had eventually convinced him to accept. The original Virginia facility remained under Darius's oversight, though his role had evolved from day-to-day leadership to strategic guidance. On a crisp autumn morning, Darius walked with Maya and Isaiah across the facility grounds. At 64, his limp was more pronounced after the injury from the barn collapse, but he moved with the same deliberate purpose, his back straight, his eyes alert. "Will you miss it?" Maya asked as they approached the administration building. "Parts of it," Darius admitted. "But it's time." Today marked Darius's official retirement, not from the program he had built, but from active leadership. He would remain as an advisor, but the daily operations would pass to others. Isaiah, now 11 and growing rapidly, looked up at his grandfather with concern. "What will you do now?" Darius rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Teach you to fish. For starters, your form is terrible." Isaiah grinned, recognizing the affectionate teasing that had become part of their relationship. Inside the building, a small ceremony awaited, no formal affair with speeches and presentations, just a gathering of those who mattered most. Jake had flown in from California. Ramirez was there, along with Warner and other key staff. The original Phantom Doctrine graduates, now instructors themselves, formed an honor guard of sorts. As Darius made his way through the gathering, accepting handshakes and quiet words of appreciation, he felt a sense of completion that had eluded him for decades. Not peace exactly. He had long ago accepted that true peace might always remain just beyond his reach, but a satisfaction in what had been built, in what would continue. After the ceremony, Jake and Darius walked alone through the training area, reminiscing about the program's early days. "California's going well," Jake reported. "We've adapted your methods for West Coast operations. Different terrain, same principles." "And your father?" Darius asked. Jake smiled. "He's visiting next month, wants to see the facility, maybe do some surfing." "Good," Darius nodded. "Family matters." They paused at the edge of the obstacle course, watching a new group of trainees tackling the challenges. Jake absently rubbed his arm where his own version of the Trident tattoo now marked his skin. Not identical to Darius's, but inspired by it, with subtle differences that represented his own journey. "I showed a struggling recruit this tattoo yesterday," Jake said. "Told him what you taught me, that this ink isn't about muscle, it's about carrying others when no one else will." Darius nodded, appreciating how his words had been carried forward. The next morning, Darius and Maya visited Arlington National Cemetery, where his wife was buried. They stood together before the simple headstone, the silence between them no longer strained but companionable in shared grief and remembrance. "I used to be so angry," Maya said quietly. "At you, at the Navy, at the world. I couldn't understand how Marcus could be gone, and then you too. I made mistakes," Darius acknowledged. "Hiding was the biggest one." Maya slipped her hand into his, a small gesture of forgiveness, that meant more than any words could express. Later that week, a new batch of trainees arrived at the facility. Among them was a young woman named Keisha Williams, whose father had been among those rescued during the dam crisis the previous year. Around her neck hung a simple dog tag engraved with Darius's motto, "Still here." As the trainees toured the facility, they passed an older man carefully cleaning a display case. One recruit, cocky and loud like Jake had once been, snickered. "They still make the janitors work that hard around here? Old dude's got to be pushing 70. Jake, leading the tour, stopped abruptly and turned to the recruit. His voice was quiet but carried a steel edge that immediately silenced the group. "That's the man who trained me," he said. "Show some respect." The recruit, flushed with embarrassment as the older man glanced up briefly, his eyes meeting Jake's in silent acknowledgement, before returning to his task. That evening, as the facility quieted, Jake found himself alone in the memorial hall. He stood before the photographs of the fallen SEALs from Operation Kingfisher, their faces now familiar to him after all these years. From his pocket, he withdrew Darius's compass, worn and weathered but still true, still pointing north, no matter the storms that surrounded it. He opened the case, watching the needle settle, and whispered the words that had become his own mantra. "Still here." Across town, Darius sat on the porch of his small house, watching the sunset with Isaiah. The boy was full of questions about his first day at junior ROTC, questions about discipline, about teamwork, about purpose. Darius answered patiently, passing along not just tactical knowledge but the deeper wisdom he had gained through both triumph and tragedy. He recognized in his grandson the same fire that had burned in Marcus, the same determination that had driven his own career. But he saw something else too, a thoughtfulness, a capacity for empathy that would make Isaiah not just a good soldier, if he chose that path, but a good man regardless of his chosen direction. As darkness fell and Isaiah went inside to help Maya with dinner, Darius remained on the porch, his thoughts turning to the journey that had brought him here, from the battlefields of distant countries to the sterile corridors of a training facility, from the isolation of guilt to the reconnection with family, from a man hiding behind a mop to a leader who had changed how warriors were forged. In his mind, he heard his own voice, the words he had spoken in that first fateful conversation with Jake. "Don't respect me. Respect the uniform, whether it's worn or not." He understood now what he had been trying to say, even then, that the trappings of authority, the visible symbols of rank and achievement, were far less important than the invisible qualities they represented. Courage, integrity, sacrifice, resilience. These were the true uniform, worn in the heart rather than on the body. As he rose to join his family for dinner, Darius felt the weight of his past, its glories and its tragedies, not as a burden to be carried alone, but as a legacy to be shared, its lessons illuminating the path for those who would follow. In the training facility, his original mop now hung encased in glass beside his uniform and dog tags, a reminder to all who passed that greatness often hides in plain sight, that dignity cannot be diminished by circumstance, that even shadows leave light behind. Have you ever wondered how many silent heroes walk among us, their greatest battles hidden beneath ordinary lives? Like and subscribe for more stories that reveal the extraordinary courage hiding in plain sight.